He's worth more dead than alive, Richard. Just make sure the dosage looks like a natural cardiac event. I froze in the darkened hallway outside our master bedroom, holding a glass of warm water. The voice belonged to my wife of 28 years, Brenda. I was 61 years old. I had just returned home from the hospital 3 days prior following a mild heart scare. A man's low voice responded from inside the room. The $3 million life policy has a double indemnity rider, Brenda. If the toxicology report shows even a trace of suspicion, the insurer won't pay a single dime. My heart pounded so hard against my ribs, I thought it would burst right through my chest. The second voice belonged to Richard Sterling, our family's trusted estate attorney, a man who had sat at my Thanksgiving table for over a decade. "He takes 2 pills every night at 9, Brenda whispered, her tone cold and devoid of any warmth I had known for 30 years. "I've already switched the prescription bottles in his drawer. He won't last until Friday." If you want to hear more raw, emotional confessions from people who survived their family's deepest betrayals, take just 5 seconds to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling these true stories. I backed away silently down the carpeted corridor, my knees shaking uncontrollably. I reached my home office, slipped inside, and locked the door from the inside. My eyes landed on the prescription bottle sitting on my desk. It was labeled Amlodine, 5 milligrams. I popped open the plastic cap and tipped the contents onto my hand. Mixed in with my small yellow blood pressure tablets were 5 white oval pills bearing a faint stamped code, V2064. I quickly typed the code into my phone. The search result made my blood freeze in my veins. Identification: digoxin, 250 meg, cardiac glycoside. Warning: high risk of fatal arrhythmia when combined with standard hypertension therapies. They weren't just waiting for me to pass away, they were actively poisoning me. Before I could even catch my breath, my computer screen chimed. An unread email popped up on our shared family drive sent from an anonymous local medical lab. The email attachment was a certified lab report dated 2 weeks ago, addressed to Richard Sterling's private law office. Patient name: Brenda Vance. Test panel: advanced toxicology and prescription verification. Result: positive for chronic arsenic bioaccumulation. Low dose trace exposure. I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. My wife wasn't just poisoning me, someone was slowly poisoning her too. Why would Richard Sterling be receiving toxicology reports about my wife behind my back? And why was Brenda suffering from trace arsenic exposure? A soft knock rattled my office door handle. "Arthur?" Brenda's voice called out from the hallway, sounding perfectly gentle, sweet, and concerned. "Darling, it's past 9 o'clock. Did you take your night tablets yet? I left your water by the sink." I shoved the white pills into my coat pocket, put 2 harmless vitamin tablets into my mouth, and opened the door. Brenda stood there wearing her silk robe, holding a small ceramic tray. Her face looked pale, her eyes slightly sunken, but her smile was warm. "I took them, honey," I said, forcing a faint, tired smile. "Just finishing up some financial filings." "Good," she said, reaching out to pat my cheek with a hand that felt icy cold. "You need your rest. Richard called earlier. He said the updated estate trust papers are ready for your signature tomorrow morning." "That's great," I lied, my stomach twisting into a painful knot. "Where is Richard now?" "Oh, he left an hour ago," Brenda said, looking away towards the living room windows. "He just dropped off some tax receipts." She was lying. I had seen Richard's dark blue sedan parked at the end of our secluded gravel driveway through the blinds just 2 minutes ago. As soon as Brenda walked toward the bedroom, I slipped out the back door into the freezing rain, heading straight for my detached workshop in the backyard. Hidden beneath the floorboards of my workshop was a heavy iron box from 1998, a box I hadn't opened since the day my younger brother, David, vanished without a trace. I pried open the iron box with a crowbar. Inside lay a bundle of old cassette tapes, a tarnished silver pocket watch, and a thick blue leather notebook written in my late brother's handwriting. David had been Richard Sterling's first junior law partner back in the 90s. Official records said David had abandoned his career and fled the country after embezzling $200,000 from a client account. I opened the blue notebook to the very last entry, dated November 12, 1998. If anything happens to me, check the deed for the Florida citrus grove. Richard isn't hiding client money. He's hiding a second identity under the name Arthur Vance. My breath hitched in my throat. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard Sterling had been using my name, my social security number, and my credit history for nearly 30 years. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from a phone number I didn't recognize. If you want to know why your wife is dying, come to the boathouse at Miller's Landing right now. Don't tell Richard. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Miller's Landing was an abandoned dock 2 miles down the river. I grabbed my heavy winter coat, pulled my old revolver from the workshop drawer, and slipped into my truck, keeping the headlights completely off as I coasted down the gravel driveway. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the dark, overgrown parking lot of Miller's Landing. Rain beat heavily against the rusted tin roof of the old boathouse. I stepped out of my truck, holding my flashlight in one hand and the heavy iron box under my arm. Inside the boathouse, sitting on an overturned wooden crate next to a small lantern, was an elderly woman wearing a dark rain poncho. When she turned her head toward my flashlight beam, my voice trapped itself in my throat. It was Evelyn Sterling, Richard's mother, a woman who was supposed to have passed away in a nursing home 5 years ago. "Put the light down, Arthur," Evelyn said, her voice raspy and fragile, punctuated by a dry cough. "I don't have much time before Richard realizes I took his spare vehicle." "Evelyn," I gasped, stepping closer. "Richard told everyone you died in 2021. "Richard needed me dead on paper so he could execute my life insurance policy to cover his offshore gambling debts in Nassau, just like he's trying to do to you right now." "Why is Brenda poisoning my pills?" I demanded, my chest heaving. "I heard her talking to him. She said I was worth more dead than alive." Evelyn let out a bitter, sad laugh. "Brenda isn't poisoning you, Arthur. She thinks those white pills are heart vitamins. Richard told her you were secretly refusing your medication because you wanted to end your life after your brother's death." The realization hit me like a physical blow. He manipulated her," I whispered, the horror washing over me. "He made her believe I was suicidal." "He didn't just manipulate her," Evelyn said, pointing a thin, frail finger at my coat pocket. "He's been dosing her tea with trace amounts of industrial weed killer for 6 months. He's setting it up so that after you pass away from a cardiac event, Brenda will succumb to grief-induced organ failure weeks later. That way, as the sole trustee of your estate, Richard inherits the entire $3 million payout and the title to your land." My blood ran cold. The toxicology report from the shared drive wasn't a test Brenda had ordered. It was a test Richard had run to monitor how fast her body was breaking down. "Why my land, Evelyn?" I asked, pulling out my brother David's blue notebook. Evelyn looked down at the blue notebook in my hands, tears welling in her aged eyes. "Look at the land survey from 1998, Arthur," Evelyn whispered. "Your brother David didn't flee the country. He found out that Richard had buried 300 leaking chemical drums from his father's industrial plating factory under your eastern pasture before you bought the property. I stood frozen in the cold boathouse, the sound of the river rushing outside like a roaring beast. "The chemical drums," I stammered, the pieces of a 30-year nightmare finally slamming together. "That's why the water well in the eastern pasture always tasted like iron. That's why my brother disappeared. David threatened to report Richard to the Environmental Protection Agency," Evelyn said, her voice shaking violently. "Richard confronted him at the workshop night after night. When David refused to take a bribe, he made sure David would never speak to anyone again." My hands clenched around my revolver inside my coat pocket. "Where is my brother, Evelyn?" Evelyn looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "He's under the floorboards of the old tractor shed on your property, Arthur. Richard poured 4 inches of reinforced concrete over the spot the very next morning." Before I could process the crushing weight of her words, a loud metallic scrape echoed from the boathouse entrance. The heavy sliding door swung open. Standing in the doorway, drenched in rain, holding a silenced pistol, was Richard Sterling. "I knew I recognized my mother's old sedan parked down the road," Richard said, calmly, his voice cold, smooth, and utterly devoid of human warmth. "Richard, stop this," Evelyn cried out, standing up from her crate. "It's over. He knows everything." "Nothing is over," Richard said, raising the weapon and pointing it directly at my chest. "Arthur came here, had an argument with his mentally unstable runaway mother, and tragically fell into the river during a sudden cardiac episode. It's a very clean narrative." "You forgot one detail, Richard," I said, stepping between Evelyn and the barrel of his gun. Richard scoffed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "What detail could an old, broken farmer have?" I pulled my smartphone out of my chest pocket. The screen was glowing bright green. "Emergency broadcast active, streaming to County Sheriff Central Dispatch and State Police Archive. Duration, 14 minutes, 22 seconds. I started a live cloud broadcast the moment I stepped into this boathouse, Richard. Every word your mother just said, every detail about the chemical drums, my brother David, and the toxic doses in my wife's tea has already been recorded on the department server." Richard's confident expression vanished in an instant. His eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated panic. "You're lying!" Richard screamed, taking a fast step forward. Bang! A shot rang out, echoing deafeningly inside the enclosed wooden boathouse. But it didn't come from Richard's gun. Richard gasped, dropping his pistol on the wooden floorboards as he clutched his shoulder. He stumbled backward, falling heavily against the wet boat slip. Standing right behind him in the rainy doorway, holding my old hunting rifle with 2 trembling hands, was my wife, Brenda. Brenda's silk robe was soaked through with mud and rain. Her face was pale, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her grip on the rifle stock was rock solid. "I followed your truck, Arthur," Brenda sobbed, her voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and fierce protective rage. "I saw Richard's car turn down the boathouse lane. I heard everything he said through the open window." She looked at Richard, who was squirming on the floorboards, holding his bleeding shoulder. "You told me my husband wanted to end his life," Brenda whispered, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly tone. "You gave me those pills and told me they were saving his heart. You made me part of your sick murder plot." Sirens wailed in the distance, their blue and red lights flashing through the trees along the riverbank as 3 state police cruisers tore into the gravel parking lot. Within minutes, officers flooded the boathouse. Richard Sterling was disarmed, cuffed, and dragged out into the rain, screaming threats at his mother and my wife as he was shoved into the back of a police vehicle. Paramedics rushed into the boathouse, tending to Evelyn and placing a warm foil blanket around Brenda's shivering shoulders. I walked over to my wife, wrapped my arms around her, and pulled her close against my chest. She buried her face in my shoulder, weeping hysterically, apologizing over and over for ever doubting my sanity, for ever listening to the snake who had invaded our home. 6 months later, the sun rose over a quiet, transformed landscape. An environmental forensics team from the state EPA completed the full excavation of our eastern pasture. All 300 toxic chemical drums were safely removed, along with the remains of my brother David. We held a proper, dignified funeral for David on a sunny afternoon in May, laying him to rest next to our parents in the town cemetery. Richard Sterling was convicted on multiple federal counts, including attempted murder, corporate fraud, environmental contamination, and first-degree murder for the 1998 death of my brother. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Evelyn Sterling received full immunity for her testimony, spending her remaining days in a peaceful state-monitored care facility far away from the city. Brenda underwent a complete medical detoxification program. Her health fully recovered over the winter, the color returning to her cheeks and the light returning to her eyes. Yesterday morning, Brenda and I sat on our front porch, drinking warm coffee while watching the morning mist rise off the green fields. The house was quiet, the air was clear, and the shadows that had haunted our family for nearly 30 years were finally gone. I lost my brother, and I came inches from losing my life and my marriage to a calculating monster. But as I look at my wife's warm smile and hold her hand in mine, I realize we didn't just survive. We brought the truth into the light, and for the very first time in 61 years, I am finally, truly at peace.